my Harry Potter glasses. So I'm excited about talking about this, Nada, and
Yes.
it's so great to see your awesome smile and your beautiful energy. So
Thank you.
so we are talking about having stronger relationships with less drama, and so we're gonna jump in and talk about this. And I think one good place to start would be that I hope you don't mind me saying that you and I are both divorced. So,
That makes us qualified.
so we're not experts. I mean, one of the points I think in what me saying this, and there's a seriousness underneath the humor, is that we grow through what's not working, right? We grow through the pain. And as I was sharing when I was promoting this yesterday, it is when we have pain, and I want to hear your experience with this, Nada, but when we have pain and suffering in relationships, that is when our stuff comes up. And when our stuff comes up, it's an opportunity for, number one, for us to become closer and heal what needs to be healed in us, so we can become closer to our partner. But ultimately, it helps us grow as human beings and be more effective, happier people, right? So, yeah.
So, a couple of things on that one. Yes, 100% agree. And we're talking about how to have relationships with less drama. The other person needs to be willing to be involved in that growth that you're going through. If you're wanting to continue on with that relationship and there's still, like, I want to say, hope for that relationship, it has to be, there's two to tango in that one.
Right, right.
But still a solo journey. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So it is. It really, I mean, there's a lot on the internet about seeing what's wrong with your partner. And I would like for this to be different from that, because really, if we realize that our partner is a narcissist, if they are incapable of having empathy, taking responsibility for themselves, if this is a quote toxic relationship, well, I mean, obviously the answer to that is, well, let's, get out. But what I'd love to address, if this is cool with you, Nada, is how, if we're wanting to work this out and make something to move forward, we're in love with someone and we want to work this out, how do we do that? And I do have an umbrella I would love to put this under, but does that sound good to you, Nada?
Let's go for it. Let's do it.
Okay.
Things I should have learned back in the day, right?
Amen. Amen. I'm well into middle age, and I'm still learning. I mean, this is certainly a work in progress. All right. So there's the cliche, right, that if you're pointing your finger at someone else, we look and we have three fingers pointing back at us. So it really, I would love to talk about taking deeper responsibility in our relationships. Now, why do you think that is important, Nada?
Okay. So the first thing that comes to my mind is you can't expect to change the person. You can't control the other person, but what you can change and control is yourself. And when you take that, if you accept that, then you start looking into, what can I do? You start looking inwardly into how you can make things better, or just kind of take yourself to the next step, basically. Because when you're in whatever type of relationship, whether it's toxic or whatever, no matter who you are, whoever claims to be the victim, there's fear. And one of them is, one fear is going to be where they have this thought that they don't care, and then the other fear is where you show that you're afraid. So we're all acting out of fear. It's who's willing to look inwardly.
Yeah.
And whoever's willing to look inwardly is the one that's going to take accountability for their own actions, not the actions of the other person, their
Yeah,
own.
yeah. And what do you think gets in the way of us facing that fear and looking within, in your experience and understanding?
Um, Fear of unknown, like what's going to happen if I do this? My whole world as I know it crumbles, so I will no longer be in what I consider comfortable and used to, right? Because everything is, even we know it's not right, we're not comfortable, it becomes a habit, and that habit is
Yeah.
comforting. Um, so I think that's what holds us back, is the not knowing what's going to happen next, moving away, being on your own, and not thinking you can do
So,
it.
yeah, I mean, here is the big conundrum, right? Is when we have conflict, we get into a stalemate in relationships. Isn't that our experience? And we get into a stalemate because we become defensive. And
Hmm.
all we're wanting in these situations is to be seen and to be heard. Those two things. I love what Stephen Covey says is the deepest hunger of the human heart is to be understood. And so what we're doing when we're having these conflicts is we're asking for that other person to hear us and to understand us. And of course, what is that other person doing? They're asking for the same thing. And the problem is we have different perspectives. And the what I have observed and what I understand is that everybody is right based on the state of consciousness that they're coming from, their level
Yes.
of awareness. And everybody's right based on their perspective. So we're in this conundrum where if we want to grow in a relationship as individuals and become ultimately closer, because one of the deepest needs as human beings is for love and belonging. I think it's really helpful to bring up Maslow's hierarchy of needs and to talk about that we have these basic needs, and Tony Robbins modernized them, and I have them written down here, and I want to talk about them. We all have a need for certainty, and so that comes up in our relationships. We want to know that person isn't going to go anywhere, so we have that need that comes up. We also have a need for variety, so we don't want to be bored in our relationships, and so that's almost like a need for uncertainty or unpredictability. We have the need for significance, so we want to be important. It goes along with wanting to be seen. So, and I'm coming to a point with this. We have, of course, a need for love, connection, and belonging. That's a basic need. It's built into our survival through evolutionary psychology. And then we have a need to grow, and we have a need for contribution, which doesn't so much play out in relationships. But all of our other basic needs, they are showing in relationships, and they're asking to be seen. And it's basically when that person shows up in our lives, number one, we're attracted to this human being. And I'm on a little bit of a roll, but then I'm gonna come back to you, Nada. But we're
My
attracted.
brain's already going. I'm ready. I'm
I know
ready.
you are. I know you are. Uh, I know how quickly your mind works. So we we are attracted to someone because there's a reason why opposites attract. Because it's built into evolution that we survived because we were looking for someone who had qualities that we didn't have. Therefore, we had a greater chance of survival. So, built into our very being on a visceral level is someone who's different from us. So, that is part of what attraction is, along with pheromones and all those other things. So, we're going to meet someone who is totally different from us, who has totally different perspectives. Number one, they are going to help us grow if we soften and listen, because what they'll start doing is pointing out what's wrong with us or where we can change. So there's that truth, and we all
Oh,
have this need.
that hurt.
And then what happens? We get defensive because built into our survival is this need, it's called ego, of course, to defend our point of view and to be right. And when we defend our point of view and just try to be right, well, we not only stop that growth, but we cut off that very much used and talked about. The first thing you talk about in relationships and growing relationships and being happier is that word communication. And there's no communication, because communication comes from the word communion, the base of the Latin word, I believe, communion. And there's no communion when we're just trying to be right and we get defensive, because that person who's different from us says, you need to change. And then I'm saying, no, I want you to hear my point of view, and we get stuck. So what the hell do we do about that, Nada?
Get triggered and start throwing F-bombs, which is the normal reaction. Get triggered and start throwing F-bombs all over the place.
Yeah.
Because that's a natural reaction. I want to go back real quick. There's something that you said that was very hard for me to accept. Now I can accept it, but it took me a long time to accept, is that you're right. Everyone is right in their own way, wherever they are in their own mindset. So my truth, their truth, is a truth. It's not anyone's lie. So when you get to that point, there's nothing really to argue, because if it's their truth and they believe it, it is. And if it's my truth and I believe it, it is. And in that case, we're both winners. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I put it into, that's how I worked it out in my brain to understand like what's going on or what went on. And then now we're going to fast forward to the other thing that you said, which is what part that kind of triggered me right now, is that being able to listen to what they're saying, to where they point out your, I guess, your issues, or what they seem as what you have the problem in, and we get immediately defensive and we're like, no, I'm not that problem, you are, right? And then we start that interchange and we have that argument, and then it gets ugly from there, and then resentment builds. But you're right, it's actually, that's part of the lesson, that's part of the teaching, is when they're saying this is wrong with you, that's a projection of each other. And so you have the choice of how do you react with that. And for all of us that have gone through this or are going through this, the first thing we do is defend ourselves.
So here's the big question is, yes, in a perfect world, like you said, everybody's right coming from where they're coming from. And it would be a nice win if we weren't in this situation where when someone points out something that is hurting that other person, then there's defensiveness. So that is the problem. So, I mean, let's talk about and I'm going to be wiping sweat off because my air conditioning is loud, so it's just going to be hot. So what is happening is we have this anger that can happen. This anger, and usually with anger is that finger pointing, is you did this to me. That's what can happen when we become unconscious, when we are not present, when we are not coming from our deepest place. The reason I would say we're not coming from our deepest place, when we get defensive and we get triggered, we're pointing the finger and saying, basically, like, if you did this differently, then I'd be okay, and this is what's wrong. Now, it's all fine and good to say you're expressing your needs, but if you're doing it from that state of consciousness, which is anger, blame, and shame, then what does that do? Well, it obviously causes the other person to be defensive, right? So we both get stuck, and what ends up happening is two people blaming and shaming. Well, I think a really helpful thing to acknowledge is underneath this anger is hurt, and it's hurt. And why are we hurt? We're hurt because we love the person, and we want to be seen. We want to be understood, and ultimately we want to connect to that other person. So I think one, and you tell me what you think of this, Nada, is one thing that can be very helpful is to know that when there is conflict and there starts to be some kind of blame on the other side, is to start to acknowledge that actually what's underneath this is hurt. And this person needs something from me. So a question I will ask, well, first of all, does this vibe with you, what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'm already being a devil's advocate in my
Please
brain.
do. Yes.
Um, I'm, so being, so yes, I think and I'm not going to say this is common knowledge because it's not. And when you're in the heat of the moment, you're in the heat of the moment. You really are. And hurt people is what the saying goes, right? So underneath, we understand that there's something lacking within them or ourselves, you know. And I think you're going to touch on this, but I'm bringing it up now just because the opportunity came, is at what point is it okay to keep taking the hints by justifying that, oh, they're coming from a hurt place. If I give them more love, you know, TLC, you know, they'll stand down, or, you know, they'll see me, they'll hear me. Where do we get to that point? Because everyone has a threshold. Everyone, one way or another.
Yes. I love that question. And I want to tell you my own personal experience with that. So there is so much said when you get on YouTube or you get on Insta or anything, and you're looking for support in relationships to having boundaries. And that, of course, is so important. And it's when that's what you're addressing, is that we need to have boundaries where it's like, okay, I'm here, you're there. The boundary doesn't have anything to do with what's wrong with you ultimately. This is just a line that was crossed for me, and I have to honor my truth. And you could say that this is more the masculine part of us, and it never works for any human being, whether we're masculine or feminine, to only be in our masculine or only be in our feminine. So if we are only coming from that place, just theoretically, I'm kidding. In my own experience, when I've come from a place of, okay, you've been going at me for 30 minutes about what's, quote, wrong with me, I'm done. I am done. That's it. So did you feel that? There wasn't much heart in that. Or, okay, I've had enough. Now, what is missing from that? In my experience, and what I've learned the hard way, and from working with clients, I've seen that there has to also be that feminine part of us, or you could say the heart, the nurturing, the understanding. So we have to feel the person also. And we can't prematurely, I would suggest, from my own experience, it's not usually helpful to prematurely go to the boundary, because that person first needs to, and this has been proven by a lot of methods about communication and psychology, is that we have to, well, we all have heard those, how to repeat back what the person says, or to say, I hear what you're saying is this. The reason we have that is we have to first get to, that person has to feel heard. That person is really asking for you to connect with them, not just on a mental level, but an emotional level, to say, I feel you, I understand. And it doesn't mean that I have to completely agree with that person, but that has to, it gets to a point where there is a boundary, but the heart has to be with it. It can't just be that we just have a boundary before the heart is caught up. They have to coincide together. So it has to be like, I'm present, not just hearing you as like I could repeat back, but I'm feeling you. And at the same time having boundaries, both of those have to be honored. So what I'm basically saying is we have to honor ourselves, which is boundaries, and we have to honor the other person, which is listening and empathy. What do you think?
Okay, so I guess my next question comes, because this is a process. This is a process of going that route. Is there, like, how many times do you do this before you finally, I guess, throw in the towel? How many times are you like the bigger person to deal with this? Like, what dictates that? Because as an empathic person, that tends to be the natural way we go initially. It's like, okay, I'm sorry, I'll do
Yeah.
better next time, or what have you. So what, how is that initial process different from what you're talking about? Because it will, if, here's what I'm thinking. If you follow that process from the very beginning and you keep going and that person is receptive, then we wouldn't be having this conversation about toxicity, right? So we're at a point right now where that person is maybe doing that, because not everybody's going to go into, like, Muay Thai style and start at it from the very beginning. There's, when you're starting a relationship, it's the honeymoon phase and you get into each other's groove and stuff. Um, but at what point do you start separating from that, from being from the empathic person to being the nurturing, and then you start separating into the more forceful, and maybe forceful is not the right word, but setting even more grounded boundaries?
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously there's no definite answer. But so one thing that I would say, the answer that I would have from my own understanding and studies is that it's not a direct answer to the question. It's more of a how. And one thing is knowing that one is empathic is a great thing to know, but dropping that label, because we all have empathic parts of us, and including our partner, and we all have destructive and narcissistic parts of us. We have all of that in us. So that's something to own, and that's a big point that I think is really important, is to own our own stuff. And I have been guilty of thinking, I'm so emotionally mature and I'm so empathic and I'm listening to you and I'm there, and you've gone off, and then I'll become a victim, and then in my mind, and then say that's enough. But the truth is when something, this is point number one, is if that person is continuing to say you're not hearing me, if that does happen, there may be a way in which I'm not hearing them on a deeper level. That could be a possibility. That's point number one. Point number two is there is a way to not absorb things as strongly, and I've found from help from mentors, because I do absorb things. But when someone starts to say, to call me out on something, part of my feeling drained and hurt is because I think what they're attacking is something in me that I don't want to own. If somebody says, you know what, you lied to me, and I did kind of lie, but I kind of didn't, for instance, but I just get defensive, then I'm pushing back. That other person feels it. But if I can just own, there's a part of me that is a liar, and there is a part of me that hurt this person. And knowing that that's not all of me, but just taking that in and owning that, then I can soften. And when I soften, then I'm going to be less drained. And when I'm less drained, but when I'm softened, that person can feel me on a deeper level. So this is about becoming more conscious. But so your question is, how do we know that enough is enough? I think the answer, in my experience and understanding, is when we have brought our heart, which is what I was just talking about, which means owning our stuff and having empathy, because we can only have empathy if we own our stuff. But at the same time, knowing that there has come a place where that other person has not, if that person hasn't softened along with you, because here's the point that I want to make, is that what I would suggest that we're trying to get to is not pointing fingers, but softening more so we can both own our stuff. We can't make the other person own their stuff, but we can bring ourselves energetically, which will invite them to soften, which will help them own their stuff. And we can only do that through empathy. And the only way we can be empathetic is to say, you know what, there is a part of you that's right, unless they're completely off. But to be in touch with that part of you, there's also a part of us that can't be affected, that is present and is okay. But if that other person is only coming from a place of blame and shame and just spewing and taking out all of their past on you because we're showing up and they're just continuing to it becomes abusive, right, at a certain point. And the question is, what is that line? And that's what you're asking. Well, the line comes from knowing that we have brought ourselves, in my experience, as much as I can with presence and love and understanding and empathy. And when I get to a point where I know that I have not been heard and nothing is being done, well, there has to be a way that we can come from a place of deeper, of love to say, you know what, we can't go on like this. So anyway, it's a really long answer to that. So what question do you have about what I said? Because I just said a lot.
So from my experience, it's now I know. Now what I totally follow now that I've learned, I've gone through the process. I was very reactive. I have a very also tend to have an alpha personality when I need to be. So I think the struggle gets harder when you're both already at that point where you're just clashing the whole time, and then you start coexisting at that point. So you're not even you're not friends, you're not in a marriage, you're just coexisting, what they call roommates, right? But I actually think that when you're in a roommate vibe, it's a perfect opportunity to evaluate where you're at. Um, I don't know if you've ever thought about that. When you are not having intimacy, you barely talk to each other and all of that, um, it gives you alone time. It gives you think time to kind of look more inwardly into the situation, um, and things start to pop up. So, and I'm talking about, I'm looking at this as kind of like phases. So we have everything's hunky-dory. Then we start seeing issues and we're coming from a place of like, I hear you, whatever, we're trying to make ends meet. But at that point, I feel that from my experience, it became an enabler at that point, just to soothe things over and not have to deal with
So
anything.
when you become an enabler, I want to make sure I understand that part of it.
When I become an enabler is where you just agree to everything just so you can have peace in that moment. So there's no more arguments, really. It's just in order to avoid any type of future arguments, you just agree to it, to just say, okay, I'm cool with it. You do you. And that way you're in it's a coping mechanism, right? It's a trauma response at that point because you're doing everything you can to find peace at that point. Now, where I see the issue with that is that people can like that comfort zone and live in that for the rest of the time, right? Or it can escalate where I know I did, where I became very combative because I was over it. I was tired of it. And I needed to, from my perspective, I'm talking from my perspective, I needed to defend myself and in my own truth, in my own world. I just needed to always protect myself. So I guess my question comes down to, it's like, I want to talk more about that quiet zone and what are people experiencing in that quiet zone where it's comfortable, it's peaceful, everybody seems to be happy even though it's not the right scenario, but it just feels better, and so you stay there.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're talking about is, and boy, I've experienced this. It's like a complacency coma. Is there's a saying for that, or when you're together and there's things you've talked about things not being said, and where there things aren't being said, and it's easier to avoid or appease the other person. You know, if you talk about fight, flight, or fawn, it's the fawning, just like, okay, you know, let's just make it easy, and so things are just kept under the surface. And it sounds like what you're saying is then things will just explode. And I'm going to be very vulnerable with you all right now. I was married to a wonderful woman, if you're listening, and we're friends, and I absolutely will always love her. We did not communicate enough, and one day she left, and it's because we didn't communicate. So if anybody understands that, I do. And so I mean, I think me being vulnerable right now, I think is what I would like to embody with what we're talking about, is that vulnerability isn't that such a huge key, because when we're lacking vulnerability, we're protecting ourselves, and vulnerability means the willingness to be hurt. It comes, I think, from that's the base of the word, is that you're allowed to be hurt in some sort of way, and so it's natural to not want to be hurt. But what you're talking about, it sounds like, is, you know, we keep things underneath the surface because we don't want to be hurt. But it really is just like going to the gym, because I know you work out a lot. Just like going to the gym, it hurts for us to grow, and we have to be willing to hurt in our communication and take risks so that we bring the stuff out that is it when we have a need, without blaming, right? Because you're talking about, we get to a point where, and I think where we started was where we're pointing fingers and blaming and shaming. It's because so much of the time when something isn't as much of a big deal, we didn't have the courage to have vulnerability. And that's Brene Brown's work, with anybody who knows that. There is no courage, as she talks about, without vulnerability. And Navy SEALs even say this. So courage is the ability, as she talks about, to share our heart and to share our story. So to bring this into being more pragmatic and practical. So what does that mean? It's, hey, sweetie, you know, this really is where I was hurt, and I want you to know this. So here's the question. If we bring up these little things with courage, which takes vulnerability, in the time so they don't explode, how can we do it in a way where it doesn't put the other person on the defensive? What do you think?
So, and I'm just thinking back from my own experiences, what could I have done better? And just also through my own therapy, you know, and mentorship, um, setting ground rules like a game,
Okay.
uh, where it's kind of like saying, here's, like, you know, when I say the word bananas, right, it's to one, kind of do like an icebreaker, right? Because you're in the heat of a moment, you say bananas or something silly, and it just kind of like breaks it down, like, okay, something needs to stop right now, right? So having like a code word that comes out to stop it, and then, you know, you sit down, and then you give each other opportunities to go back and forth and talking without interruption. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind, how we can do it without the other person getting defensive. So you have rules to go by, and then it also forces you to become patient and become the active listener that you were saying, where I hear you. I'm going to reiterate what you just said. I need more information. I'm not understanding. So we have the active communication skills going back and forth. To me, that's the only thing I can think of right now where we can have a conversation and the other person doesn't take it defensively.
Beautiful. So it sounds like what you're saying, and I've had a therapist say this to me, exactly what you're saying, is that there's a code word when things get heated and nobody's listening. Are you talking about taking a pause so that you can walk away when you have that code word? Or how does that break the cycle is my question when you say that, bananas or whatever it is?
I think you just have to come to terms. You have to have that conversation before. And that's probably, and to me, everything that we're saying right now makes sense. However, it takes, again, two to tango. So if they're willing to work on that relationship with you and you say, hey, moving forward, let's try to implement this right here and we tweak it as we go along. It's having an agreement, basically. It's just basic an agreement that you both agree upon. Now, if those agreements are broken, maybe try something
Yeah.
else, I guess. And I don't know what that something else will, because in my mind, me being combative and ready to go all like, martial artist on somebody, um, if you're not willing to go with me at this level, what makes me feel like you're going to be, you're going to be willing to be a team player on the next
Yeah.
round,
Yeah.
basically.
So, I mean, and I'm not a neurologist. I know we're not neuroscientists or anything. So, but I think it is helpful to talk about when we get into our fight or flight, we sort of lose awareness. And when we lose awareness, there is that blaming and defensiveness, and it's hard to get things done. And to get, for lack of a better way of saying it, let's just say this part of our brain, the amygdala and the neocortex, the part of us that's more evolved, where we can be more present and not just go into fight or flight and defensive and blame and shame mode. To do that, it is really important. They say it takes 7 seconds for that part of the brain, the more evolved part of the brain, to come online. So the power of the pause when things happen. So the first thing that we were talking about just a minute ago was having the vulnerability before we get triggered to share what our challenge is, and in a way, and we can talk. I talk about that in more detail, because I do have a formula that I found that can work really well. Not always, but can work. But that's one thing when we're not triggered, and to be vulnerable so it doesn't escalate. But when we get heated in relationships, the power of the pause to be able to stop, and that is where a code word sometimes can come in that can be helpful, whether it's bananas or whatever. Or I tell you a code word, it's your fault. I'm just kidding. Um, no, but but coming really being able to stop and pause, and we can do that by following our breath. And this is really, the more present we are in our interactions, in my experience and understanding, the more chance we have of communicating from a place that's deeper. Because, like we said, we're always right based on the state of consciousness we're coming from. But how can we come from a higher state of consciousness and a deeper level of presence, a place where we can really feel that person and hear them and be open so we can understand them, while pausing whenever we can. And like I said, it does take 7 seconds a lot of times when we get heated to get where the neocortex and the amygdala, and I may be wrong on the parts of the brain, come online. But to be able to stop is hugely helpful. So I'd love to bring up something that has been passed on to me that is called nonviolent communication. Would it be okay if I shared
It's not fun without violence, but
that?
okay. Just kidding.
So there is someone named, his last name was Rosenberg, back in the 70s, and and I think he was living in Detroit, and it was initially not for relationships. It was to resolve bigger, I believe, bigger conflicts, like maybe gang violence, things like that. But it can be hugely helpful to get out of the blame and shame and putting the other person on defensive, because I really think that a key part is to be more vulnerable, because when we get into the anger, we're just trying to be right. And if, like I was saying before, if we're just trying to be right, well, maybe we've gone straight to boundaries. Like, these are my boundaries. This isn't okay. And I'm right and you're wrong. Well, but the way things get done is to really have real communication. So with nonviolent communication, the first thing that is really helpful is to state an observation when there's a conflict. So can you think of a scenario, or do you want me to come up with one?
Okay, I want you to come up with it, because that's exactly what my therapist told me. And my therapist was a spiritual therapist. I didn't go to like I guess, traditional therapist. And she's like, you must observe. I'm like, observe what? I'm like, I've observed a lot, woman. You know? And it was very hard for me to understand what she meant to observe, which is how I ended up interpreting was, and then you may have a different definition, was to come from an objective view, as if you're a bystander watching two people fight, because that person as a third party is going to have a different version of what you and that other person has.
So the steps are observation, feeling, need, request. So the observation, from the way I understand it, is to get out of you, and that's the theme, is the finger pointing. And when we do that, it's really hard for there to be communication. So to come more from a place of, I noticed. And the observation would be, I'll give you an example of someone saying, all right, I'm going to give you a real example of someone I was dating, and I'm going to be.
Oh, is she online doing that same thing?
I don't think so, but it's just, I'm being vulnerable in a way where this is definitely showing that I'm such a guy. I'm a single guy, and I needed to order new socks. I had some socks that had holes in them. And I was like, and I said, yeah, I need to order new socks because I've got some of my socks have holes in them, and I'm starting to be like I'm homeless over here, and I need to get new socks. And we were walking down the street, and she's like, why don't you get new shoes? You need to get new socks. You're like a homeless person. And kind of said what I said back to me. And you need to do blah, 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 blah. And the first thought I had was, I don't need a mother. And I got defensive. And I was like, I don't need to be told what to do. And that's not okay. Now, I'm using a silly example, but I could have said, this, to go to boundaries, going straight to boundaries, this is not okay. I do not need a mother. And when you start telling me what I need to do, it's demeaning, and I don't appreciate it. So you need to cut that out. Now, on one level of consciousness, somebody could say, "Good for you. You said what you wanted," but that wouldn't have worked out really well. So an observation would just simply be saying, "Well, I noticed that you had brought up that, earlier, that I needed that I had holes in my socks," and just simply saying what happened. So you had said that I had holes in my socks, and just saying the truth of what happened. And so the feeling is not about you and what you did. It's a vulnerability, which is the key that I'm talking about. Saying, when you said that, it made me feel kind of insignificant, and it made me feel kind of insecure and not good enough. So, and then the need is the next step, the third step, which is really what I need is support. So and then I want to feel supported, and I want to feel encouraged by my partner. So then it goes to the request, which is, the request would be, if you do have an opinion, it's certainly welcomed, but I would love for you to say it in a more nurturing thing, like, "Hey, sweetie, how can we maybe think about you getting some more socks, and maybe doing it with some levity," or whatever. Does that make sense to you? And I could end with that. So, see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, it does. And the first thing that came to my mind is this is a whole paradigm shift. This is a whole new way of thinking and deprogramming how we've been come to raise to be, survival of the fittest, protect your own, protect yourself type of thing. And I feel that it takes so much more effort to come from um, that observation point if you're not used to it. So it does take a lot of time. I mean, this is from my own experience. I know you've been on the dating scene. I have not gone on the dating scene. I'm so happy in my own little world. And I know that I have to like go out and, and explore at some point. But it does take a lot of effort and it does take a lot of work to come to that um, conclusion. So I'm going to ask you, were you always like that? I know the first thing you got was you got defensive regarding the socks, right? When she came at you. When you changed your perspective and you became the observer, that was through your own experiences, through your own therapy, through everything, right? It wasn't like you had like moment and you finally knew how to address certain situations and come from a place of empathy and nurturing.
Well, it's along the line. Thank you for asking that. It's along the lines of what we're talking about. I mean, there's a technique that I used, obviously, but it really is our level of presence. Because if our mind is starting to react, to observe it and to be like, okay, I can feel the heat rising in my head. I can hear my thoughts saying, I want to tell her that this is not okay. Again, it's going straight to
Shove it.
yeah, going straight to a boundary. And there's something missing with that, right? So that is not, when I say, obviously when I'm saying violent and non-violent communication, it's non-violence verbally, right? So step one is to stay present and not react, because I want to get to response rather than reactivity. When I'm reactive, again, it's that fight or flight, the old part of my brain back here, the lizard part of my brain that just wants to yeah, you're not going to kill me. I'm going to defend myself before you do it. That's what it is. That's what fight or flight is, right? It thinks that we're in the Serengeti about to, be attacked. So so staying present, so the neocortex can come online, and the part of us that is more present. So that's step number one. And then when the observation is really to continue that level of presence through being through that level of presence verbally. So what the fight or flight wants to do is say, you did this wrong, it's your fault, that's the attack. Well, when I switch from you did this to me to just an observation, then like you said, instead of subjective, it's objective. It's almost like you're observing it. Like, so what I heard you say is that you were I'm using a different example, is that you were hungry and wanted to eat. It's almost like you're just repeating what they said. You wanted to eat and you felt like I wasn't being considerate enough because I didn't leave the house soon enough. And that's really what upset you, because you felt like I wasn't attending to your needs. Is that correct? So that's like, you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Instead of, okay, so you're getting pissed at me because I had to walk my dog and I had to make a phone call, and then you're just like freaking out at me because you're hungry. I mean, that's going straight to defensive and going straight to, I have a boundary. Well, you have to hear the person first. So it's being present and then bringing presence into the observation, and then when we talk about the feeling, it's being vulnerable to bring it back. So instead of accusatory, what we're so afraid of, the reason we get so angry is because we're afraid to be vulnerable, right? And when we're vulnerable, that's when we allow the other person, or at least invite the other person, to open their hearts and to be present also. And because what we're trying to get to when we love each other is communion. That's what communication is to really connect to that other person. So the next step of saying you're feeling, it's like I actually felt really inadequate in that situation, if it would be an example with the socks. And I felt insecure. I felt like a little kid. So I just wanted you to know that I just want to name that. So that's me being vulnerable. And then the need is, and you have to be careful about needs when someone's being defensive, right? But the need is coming from, it's just what I need. It doesn't mean I'm right, but it's just what I'm needing. And then I request because the request is coming from, ultimately, I want us to connect on a heart level, but for you to just understand my side of things. Not that I'm right, but just it's one of many perspectives. So,
Something that kind of just sprung into my head, being from, and obviously I'm not a guy, but I feel like in some instances, many more, there's a gender role. The man's supposed to be this, uh, protector and provider, and very strong. And basically, the woman should follow the man. That's the gender role type of thing. And then I'm thinking to myself, as you're going through this process and saying, I didn't appreciate the socks. Let's talk about this, whatever. From the other perspective, a female who is maybe driven, type A, would be like, oh my God, man card, please.
so
Like,
man
what
up.
kind of weak sauce reaction is
Bring
that?
your balls and man
Yeah.
up. Is that
Totally.
I love that you said that. I love that you said that. And that's what's beautiful about having another a woman here. So that's a whole other conversation, isn't it? So obviously there's masculinity and there's toxic masculinity. I can only speak as a man. So right, there's masculinity and there's toxic masculinity. So rather than me telling you what the hell that is, let me ask you, what's toxic masculinity? What's healthy masculinity, and what do you need? That's what I would ask you.
Yeah. It just depends how you define
Okay.
it. And then you may define it, and it may not be even, I don't want to say right or wrong, but it may not be the most nurturing uh, definition, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. So if you're old school, like if you were to talk to like our grandparents, that's just the way it is, right? And as generations come along, we're softening up, we're learning to be more in balance with the feminine and
Yes.
masculine energies, and just in the gender role. So we're progressing. We definitely are. But it's and this is where you were talking about how present are you
Mm-hmm.
and what level of consciousness are at, because my definition of masculinity may be someone else's definition of toxic masculinity. For me, it looked like my
Okay.
Superman, which is, I'm guilty. I'm totally guilty. To me, they look like my
Yeah.
Superman, when in reality, it wasn't the healthy type. So that's another level of looking inwardly to figure out, how do you really define it, and what is your comfort level of
So
acceptance.
tell me what you think about this, because I'm talking about a lot of feminine kind of stuff, right? But it doesn't mean that a man can't come from a masculine place. And I want to ask you your real opinion about this. And this is beautiful that you brought that up. I love that you said that I want to bring your man card. So the feminine wants to be able to soften so they can feel safe, right? They want to be able to, and you tell me, but what the definition of masculine energy is, from the way I understand it, is direction, knowing we're going this way. It's an unshakability. It's a presence. It's everything that a woman needs to feel like they can soften. Like, I know you can take care of a certain amount of things, so I don't have to do everything. And that's a whole other conversation. I know that you are not going to be the one who's going to react all over the place and be overly sensitive. And you can hold a space for my feelings, because being able to express feelings is a feminine thing. I know that you've got me. It's you can take care of me. You've got me. I can trust you energetically, which is where it starts. And then through conversation, how is it that I can soften and feel like I can trust you and feel safe? And so it's whatever that presence is. So what the question, does that resonate so far, what I've said, and what could you add to that?
That's a lot to process, but yes, it does resonate. Um, and I feel like, and this can obviously be, discussed or whatever, but as women of this age, of our Gen X, and we've been trained to basically be resourceful and independent. And sometimes we don't want to give up that independence. And then just like I was telling you about you losing your man card, that may mean like we're losing our woman card in that sense, becoming vulnerable.
Okay. So this is a great question. So, and I'm asking this with complete innocence and not knowing, when I am talking about being how, so the woman, it is when a woman is not able to soften and she feels defensive, and the man now to be, because I talked about, like, there's a masculine energy, which is, I have boundaries, this is not okay, this will not, and what I say goes, this is like masculine, you can say whether it's toxic or not, but this, what I say goes, and this is not okay. So there's that kind of energy. But my question is, just to push back, because I understand a woman needs a man, and you have to tell me what you need, but a woman needs a man to be able to have boundaries and to be able to be strong in whatever way that is. But isn't it true that you also want to be able to feel us, and you also want our hearts to be present? That's a question. It's not a rhetorical question. And that's kind of what I'm getting to with the vulnerability, listening, and the openness and communication. So what do you think about that?
Of course. I think that's one of the reasons why we females are mothers, and why men cannot be like motherly per se. Um, we give our love and attention to the children, but we as women also want that from our partner, right? So we teach that to our children, boys and girls, come from the heart, lots of love, lots of hugs, and we also want that from our partner as well. So yes, it's very important that we are able to feel you at the heart level and at the emotional level. It doesn't have to be, even Steven, it's this could be here, could be there, whatever, but there has to be at least some sort of connection
Yeah. So
and understanding.
yeah. So there is a theory because we all have masculine and feminine energy in us, and then we talked about opposites attract, and so even if you're gay or whatever you identify as, in same-sex relationships, there are still two polarities in some way, shape, or form, I would suggest, if there's sexual attraction. So this does apply to even when there are not opposite genders. So the femininity, to just say that femininity in general is about love and it's about connection, right? And masculinity is about forward movement and purpose and stability, right? So it's about it's the nurturing energy and holding a space, and love and connection and being dynamic. And with the masculine, it's about this, instead of like this kind of energy, it's more like this kind of energy. So I mean, this could be a conversation for another talk that we have, but I guess the question I have for you is, how do we because really what we're talking about is having stronger relationships with less drama. That's what this talk's about. And what we're suggesting here and what we're talking about here is, instead of pointing the finger, blaming and shaming and being right, to soften that, which is a feminine thing, to soften that and to be more present and to listen to the other person and to do that. So the question is, what is the female role in that, and what is the male role in that, if that is in fact helpful to do, to get out of blaming and shaming and being more present and listening and allowing. So my first question is do you agree with that, kind of what I've brought to the table? And number two is, what do you think the gender roles are with that?
Yes, I agree. And I think in the gender roles, now this may sound stereotypical. I feel that a woman is probably more able to reel it in faster than a man when it comes to, any type of confrontation or argument or whatever. That the woman's role would be to take again, this might sound stereotypical. It could be it can go either way. Someone needs to be the one to take the pause.
Okay.
And I feel that the woman has more ability to do that.
That's interesting. Why do you feel that way? Why do you think that?
Because we're nurturing by nature, and none of us like arguments. None of us like confrontation. And in the end, in our inner being, we know that we want peace. And I feel that because that is our gender role as a feminine, regardless, Mother Gaia, Divine Mother Mary, all of those things, we are the ones to nurture and to at least try to initiate that. I don't know. What do you think? I can't feel you out right now. What do you think in that one?
Well, I think in arguments or confrontation or conflict, what the male psyche, very much like when a male has sex, he has an orgasm and then he's just done, right? A woman can keep going, right? It's just, I'm just really talking about on a visceral level, right? They have done studies, and this is not being sexist, it's just true. Oh, I might get some comments here. But that women, when there's an argument, they say a lot more words and go on longer with the argument. Just like sex, a man wants to be, if you got a man who's more evolved, he wants to please his woman. That's a whole other story. But wants to just be done and get to the end, to get to the finish line. So what does a man do in an argument? And this is, to me, why I'm bringing in that a man can't be totally masculine. He has to bring his heart and his nurturing and his availability more. Because what a man, when he's in toxic masculinity mode, is to say, okay, what do I need? What needs to be said here where I can get to the end of this and we can be done? Does that sound familiar? And, okay, cool.
And it pisses me off.
Yeah.
It pisses me off because now you're shutting me up.
Oh, okay, no, listen. I heard what you said. I'll do better. And I totally get it. So are we done? How does that work out for that's a masculine kind of thing, and the woman is still processing a lot of times, right?
Yeah. So, I'm already triggered. Yeah. I'm ready to hang up on you.
So the question is, and I don't know the answer, I'm asking you, is how can a man, and I can give you an answer about a woman, but how can a man bring his man card, but not just be all, I hear what you're saying, we're done. Or even more toxic, no, you do not get to talk to me like this. We're over. We're done. I'm leaving. I'm going to go, right? So how does a man have that energy, which is when a man is in his masculine, he's not needing to say so many words, he can be present. But how can he bring his man card, but at the same time make you happy, heard, and to be able to be what he needs to be to give you what you want in, let's just use the example of an argument. What does a man need to do?
Well, I think we already touched base on that. I think maybe it was the whole banana scenario. Um, you know, the intervention of like, let's slow things down. I think I actually don't know the answer to that, quite honestly, because everything you said is what men typically say. In their minds, in the man's mind, they're just trying to solve the problem. They're problem solvers, task oriented. We're going to solve this problem right now. Let's just get it on the table and move on. And the woman's side, it's like you were saying, no, I'm not done talking. I have a lot more feelings. You need to hear me. Don't shut me up. You know. And your question was, how does a man still retain his man card, but yet meet the woman at the emotional level that she needs to be met?
That's the question.
Okay. You using the definition of a man as being directive, protector, and all of that. Using those definitions, they direct the conversation in such a way where it's not in a shutdown mode. So the script would look like, okay, we are at this point, we are escalated, that's task oriented. What can I do to make this better? So now it's not task oriented, it's more interactive. And now the woman has an opportunity to express herself and provide a solution to the problem. Because at that point, if it's escalated, more than likely the woman's probably going to break down because we're so busy arguing, our emotions are just out of control, and we're just going to go bleh and do the ugly cry. And that's going to be a whole different vulnerable aspect of it. Does that answer your question?
I love that answer. I love that answer. So it is.
So where do we find these men? That's what I want to know. Where do we find them?
Yeah, right. Well, we're all trying to step up in the way that's needed by the partner, and I think that's what we're talking about. And so yes, it's like being understood. Understanding and hearing and seeing the other partner rather than defending and cutting ourselves off. But what you said is beautiful, is asking an open-ended question that is about how can I understand you more, but doing it in a directive way, which is the man bringing something to the table as far as maybe where this could go. But you were talking about a woman being emotional. It really appears to me that primary, and this has been taught to me by mentors, and it's in so many spiritual traditions. Primary is energy, the energy we bring, the state of consciousness we bring, our presence, the place before we even speak. So, right. So, if my presence is that I'm holding a space for you and allowing you to, and being strong, you will feel that. I would assume, and I'm wondering, I'm just thinking right now about what I need is, from a woman as a man in a confrontation, and when there is ups here, I just had an aha moment, as Oprah would say, is just in talking about this, is the feminine is isn't it true that the feminine wants to soften, like I was saying, so it can feel safe and it can relax in masculine energy? And then when that happens, then the woman feels that she doesn't have to take care of everything, and she can trust and she can relax, and then she can melt into her masculine, that person's arms, whether it's a man or not, and relax. Isn't that one of the things that the feminine wants? Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
So if I'm, so I have to bring myself from that kind of energy where I'm allowing you to be safe and allowing you to be heard, but what I want the woman to do as a heterosexual man, what I want the feminine to do is to soften. So when a woman, to bring it full circle, when the woman I'm with as a heterosexual man is pointing the finger and saying, you need to do this, you don't get to do this, this is not okay, and she's doing that, well, she's in her masculine in a lot of ways, because she's directive and telling me what's what, but what's sexy and what's beautiful and what makes me want to take her into the bedroom and have some good makeup sex, and what makes me want to is when she softens, because what I want as a masculine person is to be the one who says, is to have purpose and direction. And that's a whole other conversation about how men mess up and get women in their masculine. But so I think you want to be able to soften as a feminine person, and I want you to soften. So that's what I just realized, and so that's part of the dance. What do you think?
You brought up a good point. Yeah, it's true. We do become in our masculine, and then we're both masculine, and nothing happens at that point. But the makeup sex is fun. But what comes after that?
Yeah, and you brought up, and we'll wrap this up at some point because I'm enjoying talking to you.
Right?
But we were talking about opposites attract, and then you were talking about being roommates, and what can happen because we have that polarity of different energy polarities, the yin and the yang, and however you want to talk about it. Is it yin and yang, whatever. And so they're two opposite energy polarities. But when the masculine is not in their masculine, and like you said, overly sensitive, and I was talking about, like, me saying what I need, but how can I do that and still be in my masculine, so you can soften and trust and relax? And how can you soften and relax, in a way where we're not in this defensive mode, but still honoring the fact we want to keep our energy polarities intact, because if we don't, we go from wanting to drag each other in the bedrooms, right? And because they're this opposite energy, and what comes with that is arguing sometimes, that happens. But we go from that until when we become complacent, when we don't communicate, when we just get through the day, then we become roommates, and there isn't that energy polarity. And it's a whole other conversation, I would assume, how the masculine is not in their masculine, the feminine is more in their masculine, and the masculine is more in the feminine, and it becomes like this homogenized, just buddies, and there's just roommates, and that's a whole other thing. So it's like, I think, how is it, the big question is, how is it that we can communicate in a way where we are not blaming, which takes some softening. That is the feminine for both, and that's feeling each other, hearing each other, being receptive, and having each other's hearts. But at the same time, have our boundaries, which is a little more masculine. How do we both do that, but at the same time, stay in our gender roles, to a certain degree, where we're giving the person what they want. And it may be that it works for that woman to be in her masculine and the man to be in his feminine, but however it works, how is it that we can stay in those energy polarities? I think that's a big question.
I think just to kind of wrap this up and close the loop here on the topic that was how to have a less drama relationship. And you answered it basically. The end goal is for you, for both parties to be comfortable and just surrender to feeling safe with each other. That's the end goal, is to reach that point of complete vulnerability and surrendering to where you both feel safe. The question is, how do you get there? And so we've already touched on a whole bunch of different recommendations, suggestions, and examples on how you can reach that point. But the end goal is, as a unit, the yin and the yang, right, is you have to figure out, find that balance between both polarities to get to the end goal of harmony, which is surrendering.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. And we talked about how staying present rather than being reactive, which can be done through taking a step away or being able to just follow your breath, and instead of going into reaction mode, to just stop, and then acknowledging that there is, just to sum this up, that when someone is angry and in there to, we're talking about getting out of drama, which is really getting out of reactivity. When someone is in the reactivity, if I'm in my reactivity, well, how do I get out of my reactivity? I have to notice that that's happening, be present, own what's happening, own the part in me that I may not be owning, and listen, which does take a certain amount of vulnerability, and listen from a place of understanding and hearing, knowing that we may not agree, but really to understand where that person's coming from, and knowing that we want to come from a place of knowing that everyone's right based on where they're coming from. But what would you add to this as we're summing this up from what we've talked about?
So what you're saying is just we're still on our individual journey, and working to work with others, basically to coexist from a loving way, in a very harmonious way. And the only way we can do that is, like you were just saying, is just taking accountability for our own thoughts and actions.
Yes, I mean, when our stuff comes up, it's about really becoming responsible for our own stuff, in my opinion, and knowing that there is something that I need to look at, and the way I need to do that is to see what this person needs from me that I'm not giving them, and not going into reactivity and defensiveness. And that work may mean outside that conversation, but giving that some thought, and in the moment, hearing them on a deeper level, bringing my heart, number one, but also bringing my boundaries, both, and being able to just stay grounded. And when something feels attacked, knowing that a lot of times when it's something that is reactive in me, it's because it's something in me that I don't want to see. So that's the work, right? So
that's the shadow work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this has been great. Is there any final thing that you would want to add, my friends?
No, this has been great. I can't wait. I guess we're going to do a 2-week cadence. So in 2 weeks, we'll have another topic of discussion.
Yeah.
And for those who are listening, if you guys want to listen to something, get involved in something, hit us up with the comments, or in our individual, I guess, what do they call them, tags or whatever, and we'll hit them, because this is relevant to everybody. It's not just to me and him. This is for everybody. And this is our mission, to help one person at a time.
Yep.
So I love it. Thank you so much. I appreciate this. This was amazing. I love talking to you.
I
Always
love
fun.
talking to you too, Nate. It's been a pleasure, and I love the way we get a little Siskel and Ebert and don't always agree, and that's what makes things interesting, to be able or to really question things and get, in this, and I learned a lot from our conversation. So
Yeah, me too. It's definitely from the male perspective. I'm like, you guys think that way?
yeah,
So, no, it's great. But thank you so much, everybody, for
yeah,
those who stuck
yeah,
around. I know it was kind of long. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. It's one of many coming up. And yeah, thank you. Have a good night, wherever
yeah.
you
We'll
are.
see you in a couple weeks, and for those who are watching later afterwards, just tune in same time next. We'll post it, but the same time in 2 weeks.
Yes, perfect.
Bye.
Bye.